So, Helen,
Yeah, I'm good. We have good internet today, thankfully, so we can actually
our last minute messaging yesterday over technical difficulties, always the way with whenever you have something scheduled, isn't it? It's like right, and then that's the time the internet decides to go.
But we're fine today, so we can go ahead.
We are. And look, we've got some good, fun legal stuff that we're going to cover today. Some good stories, I reckon, in there. But before we kind of dive on into things, do you want to give people a little bit of an overview about yourself, the contract doctor, all of that jazz?
No problem. So I think a lot of people assume that I just started off in law, stayed in law, and then we just decided to jump into recruitment. But actually, I started in law, randomly became a recruiter for a while, and then jumped back into law. So we do actually have both sides of the coin in our experience. So we help companies when they're first incorporating, whether that be by themselves, with people, help them start trading, help them start scaling, help them bring on staff, and then we can help them when they come to their sale as well. So we've got a full life cycle and how we can actually help recruitment agencies to live, basically.
Yeah, nice. And I think it's so important having had that experience, although very unusual to have gone from like a lawyer to then a recruiter. What was the driver there?
I just wanted to get out of law and I thought, what am I actually good at? And nothing. All I can do is law. I have no other skills. And then I fell into recruitment, like I think a lot of people end up doing. And then you learn a whole different skill set. So I think it's the kind of industry that you do end up falling into. I don't think anyone grows up thinking, I'm going to be a recruiter. But once you're in it, you either love it, you adapt to it, you learn it, or you hate it, you learn a little bit and you get out. And that's what I did. I got into it. I learned a few skills. It was not for me, but I did enjoy the industry. So thankfully, the company I was working at said to me, stay with us, move into our legal team. And I loved it. So I found my little niche. I found where I wanted to be.
And that's often the case, isn't it? It's like, as you say, people do fall into it and then a lot of people end up loving the industry. And I think there's so many things that you can do within it, not just even recruitment itself. So there's a place for everyone, so to speak. But I think a good place to start is probably around sort of contracts. So, we had an example the other day. Someone said to me, I'm just starting up or whatever. Like, can I just take some old terms of business from, a friend that sent them to me? Could I just copy them? Do you reckon that's all right? And I was like, no. I mean, what's some of the biggest sort of contractual mistakes you guys see?
Oh my God, I don't want to sound like Dr. Seuss, but the things I've seen. So first of all, people do quite often steal their terms. They think, I'm going to start off on my own. I'm just going to nick these terms, or I'm just going to take them off my friend who probably had them done professionally. But if you don't know where they came from initially, they've probably either been Googled or drafted by someone themselves, or stolen from another company who probably got them from Google or drafted them themselves. So you should always be able to say where your terms have come from. Not only that, you should also understand exactly what each clause means. We get a lot of contracts in where they've either got duplicate clauses in there, which sometimes doesn't mean too much. It could be the same clause worded in a different way, but it means the same thing. Or sometimes we get clauses in there which are about the same thing, but they're actually contradictory. And just last week, we had one where people look at the boilerplate, just those clauses at the end that go in every contract, and they think they don't mean anything. So they'll either get rid of them or they won't read them.
Yeah.
And we had one about assignment rights. One said, yes, you can assign. The other clause said, no, you can't assign. So if you don't understand what your clauses mean, you might end up having a contract there where it actually means nothing.
Yeah.
So you should definitely understand what every single clause in your contract means. We've also had clauses where people haven't realized that there's been a foreign clause in there, despite the fact it's in a completely different language.
Okay.
Then when I've done I do a risk review for them and I'll say, you've actually got a clause in there that's in German, and they'll go away, they'll translate it themselves, and they'll come back and say, right, we've sorted it. Can you now look at our terms? And we had one recently where the translation was bum up strike. So we sent to a peer review where they were wholly against bum up strikes, which I'm not going to say that they might be fine, but don't put that in your contracts. No one wants to make that a contractual obligation.
No, I definitely think not. I mean, the thing is, I think contracts is something that people like, they just don't, I think about until they need it. But then by the time they need it, it's too late, you know. And I know loads of people, especially like in the lovely land of Rec to Rec, very much advise good contracts and that, you know, that will be like, oh, but you know, they were like a friend, they were a mate, I had a really good relationship with them, and I sent them my standard terms, I thought it was fine. And you're like, just doesn't work, you know.
Yeah, at least with those ones they've tried. We've had 2 instances in the last week where people have just thought, oh, they're friends, so we're not going to bother getting contracts in place. And I think one of the people who I spoke to about this is probably listening in right now. So I'm not going to say his name, I don't want to embarrass him, but we'll call him Taniel. So Taniel had a very good friend and they put a non-solicitation in place verbally. I don't quite know how you would actually argue that that was a thing, especially when it's something so important. But law of mates agreed it. And I don't know how one party is actually going to say that they've remembered it in the same way either, because there are so many different ways that you can interpret an non-solicitation clause.
Yeah.
Does it still count if the person applies directly to you? Oh, I don't know. We didn't really discuss that aspect of it. No, but you also didn't write it down. So one party could argue, no one can actually prove it. And the other person had a data protection breach. There was terms in place with the client, so it was passed down to them, but there were no terms in place with the contractor. So they didn't know if they could pass it down to them. So whether you're mates or not, you don't actually know if a scenario is going to arise, which you haven't thought about, you know, you haven't spoken about, so you have an oral agreement, you don't know what's going to happen. The terms are just really important for people to clarify their position, whether they're friends or not.
Yeah.
You might need to look at them in scenarios that you not think about off the top of your head.
Yeah, and I think I'd probably argue actually that if you are friends in any kind of capacity, it's probably even more reason why you'd want to have it in place, because if you kind of want to maintain sort of that level of friendship if things might not go to plan, you know, you want to almost take that out, the sting out of it, you know. So it's like you can just refer back to, well, this was something we both agreed to, versus, well, I remembered it this way and I thought about it this way, you know. And before you know it, it's like, oh, it's not going to be a good ending.
Exactly. I get a lot of people who say, well, it's just a piece of paper that I'm going to put in my drawer and never even look at. And you know what? If that happens, fantastic. But would you not rather have that protection in place for if you do need to dig it out from the bottom of your drawer and actually read it? It's just going to save you so much time and aggro later on, simply just having a piece of paper taking up some space on your computer.
I know, exactly. It's one of those things where it's like you'll never ever regret it, you know, by doing it. And I think you mentioned there around the data protection piece as well. You know, that I suppose is key because, you know, obviously with like GDPR and like everything that's kind of come around with all of that, you know, so many people I know just don't really even still kind of know what's expected or like whether their contracts kind of cover them and things like that. So, I mean, what's some of the experiences you've had on the data protection side?
We get a lot of people who don't realize that when they first start up, there isn't a small company exemption on data protection. They actually think that, oh, just one person, so it doesn't apply to us. We can do anything. But it's not really the case. You're still bringing in data. Therefore, you still need to, first of all, be registered with the ICO. Tell them, by the way, we bring in data. And two, know what to do with it. So if you look at it from your own perspective, if you were going to give your information to a company, you want to know what they're doing with it. You want to know where it's going to be, or I do anyway. I'm sure not everyone does, but I want to know, what are they actually doing with my data? Can they send it to third parties? Can they mark it to me? How are they going to store it? Do they have the right protection in place? And this is what you need to be telling people in your privacy notice as soon as you take that data. So even if someone gives it to you, you need to say, thank you for your data. We're going to look after it. Here is how. And people don't quite realize that's the point. They overcomplicate it. So in their heads, they're thinking, oh, I need to do all of these things. I need to have 50 different documents. No, you don't. Right? You need to have a privacy notice where you're telling people, thanks for your data. This is what we're going to do with it. Then you need to have a document internally so that people who work for you know how to treat that data. If you're being open, you're being honest, you're training your staff, generally you'll be okay.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing about it. I think in terms of, you said there, people think that it's way more than it is. And I think they almost put it into this kind of like, I'll deal with it later box, because it's going to mean loads of work and I'm going to have to do tons of stuff with it. And then, I'm going to have to understand it completely from like, A to Z, when it's like, actually, it's not. There is just, certain things you do need to do, but it's not this mountain that you've got to try and, get across.
Exactly. I think the beginning part of it seems harder because you do need to look at your business as a whole, spot where the gaps are. And we get all of our clients to do an audit. And the audit teaches them so much about their own business. So how are they bringing in data? Is there actually a gap where it's going into some black hole? Are you having CVs sent to you and actually then losing them because it's being passed through so many people? So it's not just about looking at your audit from a data protection point of view, but it can also help you smooth out your processes for your entire organization.
Yeah. And we get a lot as well. So, we use virtual assistants, and we're big advocates of that. They're all sort of within our business and within our team and within sort of our processes and systems and everything. But I know a lot of people that will have them sort of as very much sort of outside supports. And they'll be like, oh yeah, I get them to help me, with CV formatting or something like that. And I'm like, okay, but are you just like sending them CVs to like a Gmail account? Or, you're a bit like, and people just don't really think about it. And I think, as you say, there is this probably small company exemption mindset, maybe, oh, well, it's fine kind of thing. And you just think, I don't know, it's just, there's small changes you could be making to just have peace of mind and cover yourself.
There is, and that's with all aspects though as well. Whenever we deal with a lot of startups, and it's not just the contracts and compliance piece that we help them with, but it's actually how to understand they've got these new obligations. And even when you start looking at, okay, you're incorporating your company now, you probably shouldn't incorporate just with you within shares, because actually telling HMRC that you have a £1 million company, and I think you do right now, you shouldn't do that. Then it's their shareholder agreement. Okay, you're going into business with your friend. Fantastic. You should probably have a shareholders agreement in place. And then we get, oh, we don't really need to. We've been working together for years. Yeah, you have, and that's fantastic. But you've never owned a business together. So what if you want to get out of it? How are you going to do that? You need to have this agreement in place which says this is how you can leave. Do you have to offer the shares first to the other person in the business, or can you go and sell to Bob down the road? Does Bob want to own a share of your company? He might do. You can just go off and sell to him. Fantastic. And then what are your obligations when you leave the company? Can you go and set up on your own and compete? Can you work next door to each other and just be competing businesses now? Again, that's something that people don't really consider when they go into business together, because we're all friends and it's all going to be like this forever, and it's fantastic.
Yeah. And also it's the age-old consideration as well of, okay, it might be the two of you now and hopefully it's off into the sunset and all of that jazz. But yeah, what if you want to bring in more people later? How does that look like? And will you always agree? Probably not. So how do you cover yourself, in those sorts of situations? And I think, again, it probably goes back to that law of mates. Oh, he or she is my friend. We'd never have this situation. The amount of times I've heard that, it's like, and then people get surprised when sometimes it does happen. I just think, and another common one that we hear a lot of, like when it comes to actually operations in general, but legalities and things like that, you reference with the terms, oh, well, I got them from Google. Like we get so much with like, oh, I just Googled, like, do I need to have this insurance policy or that? Or what does this look like? And you think, oh, just don't Dr. Google it. You know, it's like, please don't.
Google is possibly the worst thing when it comes to law, because people do a little bit of Googling and they think that they know it. Now, I go to lawyers when I need things doing. You don't know everything about everything. So we deal with terms and conditions, we deal with shareholder agreements, we deal with data protection, but then we bring in outsiders when we need specialist help on things. So when I hear people saying, oh, we've got an employment issue and we're dealing with it ourselves, I think, why? I wouldn't deal with an employment issue by myself. We bring in consultants to help us with anything like that. But people do just become experts. They go on Google, they look at some terms and conditions, they think, you know what? I remember a couple of years ago, I had to look at a contract for something and it went fine and there've been no issues. So I know how to read a contract, and this has come off Google and I've read through it and I vaguely understand it. So let's use this as our terms of business to protect our entire company for years to come. It'll be fine. Basically, usually it's not worth the paper it's written on. So many holes in it, and it's just not going to.
As you say, sometimes it can be even detrimental, because if it has those contradictory terms where you're thinking, oh, I'm covered, and you're going off and doing something, and then actually your terms are almost like counteracting what you think you're covering, it's kind of like, I don't know. I think a lot of people, though, think, as they often do when you come to stuff that they feel isn't maybe going to make them money directly, you know, oh, but I'm going to have to spend money on it. And like, you know, it's probably going to be more expensive than it is, you know, or is it going to be worth it? And it's like, often I always get surprised that it's not as expensive as you think it would be. And then the fact is, it is protecting your entire business. There are so, like, it's an investment that is so worth it.
I know. We really tried to help those startups who are bootstrapping. I mean, I bootstrapped when I set up the company. I know how painful it is when someone gives you a cost and you think, Google's a really good option right now. So we set up the 90-day payment terms, obviously, for all the companies that were starting up during lockdown. They'd all been put on furlough or made redundant, all setting up on their own. All of them had no money. So we set up the 90-day payment terms to help them get on their feet. Then we've also got other options for people apart from the long payment terms. We have credits, so people can actually buy time in advance. It's got a discount on it. And rather than people having to have a contracts manager sat in their building that they're paying a full-time salary to, we basically act as their outsourced back office. We do their contract management, their legal reviews, bits of admin pieces. And it just helps people to build that relationship with you as well and get that trust. And rather than having to guess, what does this risk actually mean? Yeah. Should we be accepting it? They can just come to you. They can just ask the question. It's not going to get to like 10 grand in an invoice that you're not expecting at the end of the month.
Yeah, because I think people do think in their minds, all of a sudden they think legal, they think lawyer, they think hourly rate, they think, oh my God, this is going to go through the roof or whatever. When actually it's like, you know, there are many options out there depending on what your business needs and what it kind of requires. But I suppose for a lot of people, sometimes they don't even know what they don't know, you know, so you guys do sort of risk reviews and things like that, don't you?
We do. So when people have taken their terms from Google, you never know. They might have struck lucky. They might have a really good document. So they'll send that document over to us, and we just basically do a free high-level review where we look at it and we will say, your contract is missing these things, or this isn't right, or you're actually at risk here. And we send that back to them. Sometimes I will say to them, this is terrible. This is possibly the worst contract I've ever seen. And they'll turn around and say, oh, well, it's been working so far, so we're just going to keep it. And I think, fine, I will see you in a couple of years when something terrible goes wrong. Other times we get a contract through and it's actually quite good. They might have professionally drafted. It just needs a bit of updating. I'll be really honest with them and say you can have it done from scratch, or actually we can just spend an hour or two updating it. This is what it will cost. And it's usually those people who are like, do whatever it takes, make it watertight. I don't know, just do it. So you kind of get a sense when people send through their contract for review how they're going to be, and it's explaining listen, if you don't do this, I'm telling you very honestly, you are going to be in a lot of trouble in the next year. This is not going to stand up.
Yeah, definitely. And what kind of advice would you have? Because I was just thinking there, you know, when you mentioned watertight, which is very important. But I remember an instance where one of the other sort of fellow Rec to Recs, we have a WhatsApp community, part of RecWired, also in the Rec to Rec space. But someone signed their client's terms in the usual fashion of just jumping and having a look at some basics to make sure they were all right. And then they forgot to check, I think it was like the candidate ownership period was maybe like 3 months or something. It was so short. And then they got completely shafted on the other side. And they were like, oh, I can't believe it. You know, what sort of things are the really pertinent things you think people should be looking at when they're, you know, considering signing someone else's terms?
When you're signing someone else's terms, sometimes you actually don't have the ability to change it. They'll just say you either want this deal or you don't. But the important thing is understanding that risk so you can try and negate it as best you can. A lot of the time they will allow you to push back, in which case, fantastic, you can do a bit of negotiation, but even just understanding your risk. So understanding, is there an actual cause and effect between what I am doing and the contract? You need to have that correlation there so that you actually have a contract that's worth anything. Then you need to know what your liabilities are. And this is everything from, if something goes wrong and it's your obligations, what is your cap on that liability? If there's a data protection breach, if there's a confidentiality breach, if, like you say, there's an ownership breach, what do you actually do there? What's the liability on both sides? Obviously, a biggie for recruiters is payment protection. Can you actually get paid? We've seen some really horrible clauses actually from a client perspective, where if your candidate drops out, you owe them money to make up for the fact that they wanted this candidate to join and they're not doing, and therefore they think they deserve damages for that.
Oh,
things like that can come into effect. And if you don't read the contracts, if you're purely looking at how does this affect me, do I get paid, do I earn this candidate, then you're going to miss clauses where you might actually have to owe an obligation to your client. So just having someone read through it who knows what they're talking about, and if that happens to be the owner of the company, fantastic. If you know what you're doing, give it a quick read, but don't just focus on the fact that, yay, we've got a deal. Let's get this done. Let's get it over the line. Let's do it. No, you need to understand what your risks are if it goes ahead, because sometimes rebate periods can be horrific. They're getting longer and longer. So you just need to be really careful that you know what you're getting into and you understand that. Don't go spending the money as soon as it comes into your bank.
And I think as well, you know, it's really important, you know, one clause in particular, which I think people don't actually sort of put too much emphasis on or understand fully enough, either in their own terms or in terms that they sign, generalization, but is around like terminating a contract. You know, I think a lot of people think, oh, well, I work with this company, I don't really like them anymore, I'm not going to really work with them or whatever. And they don't really give it a second thought. And maybe they go and headhunt from them or something like that, you know, in 6 months, 12 months time. And then said company comes back and says, well, actually, we had non-solicitation. You didn't terminate the contract. So yeah, I want money for the candidate you took from us or something. So I think people forget sometimes about that, you know, is there a termination? If you don't want to have this contract anymore, do you need to give notice? And how long is that notice for?
Yeah, those are quite biggies, especially when it comes to perm, where people can just decide, oh, we don't want to do work with them anymore. But even when it comes to contract, we get some people who will focus on their client side and their contractor side as two very distinct contracts. But actually, all of those obligations you've got with your client, you want to be flowing those down to your contractor and making sure they match up. Because when we look at terminations, the last thing you want is your client able to terminate with a week's notice, and you're stuck with a 6-month notice period with your contractor. So everything needs to be backed off. You need to think of them as being intrinsically linked. They're not two separate contracts.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, we're so perm heavy, but yeah, I didn't even think about that from a contract perspective. That would be really, really essential. So look, I know we've gone over a little bit. I actually got kind of nerded out on some of this stuff. So I love it.
Contracts are so exciting.
I do. I love it. But anywho, where can people find you, Helen?
LinkedIn. I'm there all the time, always on LinkedIn. Pop me over a message. You can email me, helen@thecontractdoctor.co.uk, or a lot of people actually WhatsApp me. I'm not going to put my phone number out there. It happens way too often. But once we've had a bit of an email and we've got a bit of a relationship, feel free to WhatsApp me. I'm pretty active on some of our groups.
Yeah. WhatsApp is a busy one. We were just talking beforehand about the RecWired community, which is growing more and more every day, which is awesome. So if you're a member, great. If you're interested in becoming a member, don't hesitate to reach out to me. You get some awesome sort of deals and things like that, and access to experts like Helen. So look, thank you so much, Helen. Really appreciate it. I know we are due to catch up at the Agency Recruitment Expo in Birmingham in a couple of weeks at the NEC. So again, if you are that way and you want to pick Helen's brain, we have an event in the evening at 6 p.m. at the Highline Lake Lounge. There is only a couple of spaces left, so message me if you'd like a ticket. But thank you so much, Helen, and have an awesome day. I will see you soon.
Thanks for having me. Bye.